reckon we're pretty good to go. All right, Sasha, do you want to kick off?
All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome all to our virtual event put on by the Oxford Business Alumni Network. I'm Sasha Trong, and along with Ed Lee and Sri Iyer, we're on the committee for the Los Angeles chapter. For the past couple of years, we've been organizing different talks. Today, we're very excited to share with the wider Oxford community. A few housekeeping issues. Everyone who's not a panelist or speaker should be on mute and have their videos off, but if not, if you could please check your computer or phone right now, that would be great. And also for our Q&A, we're going to be using the chat function, which is at the kind of bottom of the window or screen. If you have any questions during the discussion, please use that, and our speakers will do their best to address it during the discussion, and if time permits, at the end. I'd like to thank Hannah Evans, David, and Jill for helping us organize and make this a global event. And I'd also like to thank our panelists, Leslie, Yehuda, and Max, for taking the time to share their perspectives with our community today. And with that, it is my great pleasure to introduce our moderator, Lily Lapenna. Lily and I met over lunch about a year and a half ago at a cute cafe in Santa Monica. And ever since then, we've been trying to do something together for the Alumni Network. It was her idea to bring this together with this interesting topic about shifts during COVID-19. Lily is an industry advisor for the Said Business School, as well as a lecturer at Occidental College. She's a breadth of experience coaching business leader and has been recognized by Queen Elizabeth for her work in social impact. Not only is she the mom of the cutest girl in the world, but she also launched a new business in the middle of a pandemic. I'll stop talking now and kick it over to you, Lily, to start us off.
Thank you, Sasha, for that wonderful introduction. I still have very fond memories of the first time we met, when we could go to cafes and have lunches together. I look forward to that happening again soon. Hi, everyone. Great to see you. Let us know where you're joining us from. It's wonderful to have such a global group here today. I've been involved with Said Business School and various other parts of Oxford University over the years, specifically through the SCOL World Forum and the Young Global Leaders of the World Economic Forum. So it's really great to be reconnecting with you all. I run a business called Glio. We work with businesses, nonprofits, and governments. We offer executive coaching and consulting services. And it's really my pleasure to be here today with three of my clients, who I also refer to as friends, that I've now had the pleasure of working with for various months. So I'd like to welcome Leslie, Max, and Yehuda. And the idea was to look at really this current season of our lives through the lens of the great Machiavellian quote, you know, never waste the opportunity offered by a good crisis. I struggle with the word good. I think there's been a lot of terrible things that have come out of this period, and I do not want to discount any of those, but I wanted to use today to focus on what shifts have happened in business that we can learn from, that we can incorporate into our future vision of how we work, of how we strategize, and how we connect with each other. So I brought forward three incredible business leaders who work in very different sectors, and today's conversation is going to be quite diverse and varied in terms of sectors. So we're looking at philanthropy, we're looking at amplification of voice-enabled devices and technology, and we're looking at also the intersection between digital inclusion, mobile, and social impact. It'll be a really rich conversation. If you bring in your thoughts, your questions, and your suggestions, feel free to do that through the chat. So I'll take a moment to introduce the three panelists, and then I will put a few questions to them, and then I'll really open up for your questions. See this as the beginning of an engagement with us, and feel free to stay in touch beyond this call. So first of all, I wanted to introduce Leslie Garcia-Amaya, who is works in global business development at Google. She's really one of the leading voices in voice-enabled technologies. She's seen the huge transformation that has happened with Google Assistant over the last few months as more people are staying at home. Google Assistant has now been installed in over 1 billion homes. So Leslie will talk to us about this and her work in two verticals: recipes and also financial inclusion and financial partnerships. Leslie is really a leader for me in women in technology, and has real insights and opinions to share on any new products that Google is working on and launching. So Leslie, thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks for having me, Lily.
I also wanted to introduce Yehuda Gurwitz. Are you on video? Yay. Yehuda is joining us from New York. Yehuda is CEO and founder of Charidyon with a D. Charidyon is one of the fastest growing online giving platforms. It's revolutionizing the way people give. It's got what I call the magic sauce that allows nonprofits and charities to enhance their giving by 90%. It's helped global NGOs raise over 1 billion. He started it in 2013. He's currently working on a campaign with the CDC Foundation, and they have already raised just shy of 50 million. So Yehuda will talk to us today about transformations that he's seeing in the world of philanthropy and how shifts have started to happening because of COVID and what we think those will look like into the future. Thank you, Yehuda, for joining us. And finally, Max Cuvillier, if I pronounce that correctly. Thank you, Max, for joining us from London. I know it's coming to the end of your day and you've had a busy, intense day. We're so excited to have you here. Max heads Mobile for Development at GSMA. He's singularly positioned at this incredible intersection between digital inclusion and mobile and social impact. And he's going to talk to us today about some of the trends that he's seeing in emerging markets around social impact, around digital innovation, and around social economic inclusion. Thank you, Max, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so I'm going to give you a few minutes to tell us a little bit about yourselves and a few of the exciting shifts that you have started to notice about 2.5 months into this COVID-19 crisis. I'm going to start with you, Leslie.
Great, thank you, Lily. Can everyone hear me okay? Just to check. Yeah, okay. So thanks, Lily, and thanks for having me. It's great to be here. I want to take a little bit, just a couple minutes on my intro because I do think it's relevant. So I grew up on the East Coast of the United States in Pennsylvania, in a small town called State College, Pennsylvania. It's the college town of Penn State University. My parents are actually California natives, and they moved across the country many years ago, so my dad could pursue his PhD at Penn State. And then he went on to build one of the largest online world campuses at Penn State. And my mom always worked in education, and she retired recently as an elementary school principal. I got my undergrad from Miami University of Ohio, and then spent a year in southern France where I had studied abroad after university. I then moved to New York and started off my career in human resources. I started off at a tech startup of about 60 people where we were working with clients like AOL and NBC. And then I moved to Yahoo, where I had an opportunity to work on the divestiture of hot jobs to Monster. So back in 08, 09, when job listing websites were a hot thing, I worked on kind of one of the biggest divestitures at the time. I joined American Express after that, and there I got a chance to work in a few different HR roles, mainly advising senior leaders on their people strategy. And then went to NYU to get my MBA, and shortly thereafter moved to Silicon Valley out on the West Coast and joined Google. This is about 5 years ago now. And so currently, as Lily mentioned, I am leading a couple of different verticals within Google Assistant partnerships. Google Assistant is used by more than 500 million people. It's available in over 90 countries and in more than 30 languages. And so I'll talk a little bit more about my role on Google Assistant partnerships. So on the recipe side, I work with partners like Food Network and All Recipes and Tasty and Tastemade to enable their content, their recipes content, to surface on the assistant. So that if you were to say, hey, Google, show me recipes for chicken enchiladas, then you would see kind of their recipe content surface on our devices. On the finance side, I work with partners like American Express, Capital One, Bank of America. We recently launched an action with American Express so that you as a user, if you're an Amex card holder, could say, hey Google, what's my American Express account balance? Or hey Google, what are my recent transactions from American Express? And so this recently launched about 6 weeks ago. It's just starting to get some good momentum. You might be wondering about privacy concerns, and so we've thought about that, and Google recognizes that it's your voice asking for that account information through our voice matching technology. And so those are the kind of the primary verticals that I'm focused on now. The other area that Lily mentioned that I play a big role is in women in tech. And I founded the Women At chapter for my organization at Google. And I'm also play a leadership role in the women in voice space.
Thank you very much, Leslie. And we're going to go into much more detail about what it means to be able to, check our financial statements through voice-enabled devices in our home, because that sounds quite radical. And I know that's a new shift that has happened recently, partly due to the COVID situation. So before we go there, I'd love to hear from you, Max, a little bit. Maybe you can sort of zoom out and give us a bit of a global perspective, but also please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, Lily. So my name is Max. I'll do the introduction very quickly. I'm originally French. I studied in France and in Spain, then worked in the Middle East and across Africa on digital innovation. And I've now been with my organization for the past 7.5 years now in the same department. And as you explained very well, Lily, we work at the intersection of digital innovation, socioeconomic impact, and trying to bring a private sector angle into things, looking at commercial sustainability and long-term sustainability. I've been with the department for 7.5 years, and I was promoted at the head of department at the beginning of January, which was obviously a very interesting time to start a new role. I had a big ideas and a big plan, and COVID-19 basically flushed everything down the loo, and replaced that with a very interesting challenge, obviously. And to answer your original questions about the impact it's had on us so far, I think for the first month we were pretty much stunned, because we were hit by the double whammy of COVID-19 and the fact that we were one of the first companies to have to cancel one of our very large events, which is also one of our core revenue generator at the end of February in Barcelona, when all the costs were already incurred. So obviously it had a big impact on the business, and it took us a bit of time in my department to really just think about what we could do. And then there was kind of a wake-up call from one of our main donor partner about 1.5 months ago, when they said, like, you have a lot of assets, but you're losing your voice in the area, and you're also missing a lot of opportunities to add value. And then I was very fortunate to have a team who put a lot of thought, a lot of effort, a lot of energy basically into coming up with a plan. And within a 3 weeks plan, 3 weeks time frame, we had a very solid plan that was made of some chunky pieces of work that will keep us busy for the next 3 to 6 months, as well as smaller pieces that each team could go and run with very quickly. So yeah, I'm in a better place now for the past 3 weeks now, where we have this plan, we know what we're doing in the next 3 to 6 months, and we'll do what we're best at, which is deliver. But I thought it was interesting to maybe share those 3 phases, being stunned, running around, and now like having a cooler head and delivering.
Thank you, Max, and we look forward to actually hearing what's in this plan that seems to be grounding you and the months ahead in terms of the strategy for your team. Thank you for that. Yehuda, we'd love to hear from you. your work seems to have has really amplified over the last few months, especially through the CDC Foundation campaign, but also through a lot of the other work that you're doing to support nonprofits in this time of great crisis and change. So let's hear from you.
So my name is Yehuda Gurwitz, and I grew up with a strong belief that people want to do good and people try to do good. And it's really been a big part of me throughout my upbringing. But something that I realized is that throughout, my first fundraising campaign was when I was in the second grade. It was for my teacher's surprise birthday party. So I was 7.5 years old, and I had a board meeting in my friend's basement. It was 3 of us, and we raised, I think it was like $42. So that was a big accomplishment at that time. But I always did a lot of pro bono fundraising projects, and one thing that I really realized throughout my career was that at their core, people want to give, people want to do good, but the problem is there's a lot of inefficiencies throughout the space, throughout the giving space, a lot of inefficiencies. So we launched Charity, which the mission was to increase the space, and if we truly create efficiencies, that will increase the space more than anything. So we looked at the space and said, what will work? And with that, we raised over the past few years, we helped organizations raise over $1 billion, and really by helping them increase and maximizing and monetizing their social equity. Something that came to me, which is very interesting, and actually, obviously not from a good place, but quite exciting, is through COVID, just like any other industry, as you all know, in every space, anything in tech has been more successful and people are going more online, whether it's travel is going down. One of the biggest problems in the giving space has been, and sort of a bottleneck when it comes to philanthropy and donors, has been the overhead and how much it costs. And that has been probably the biggest block in what has been stopping people from giving. When people feel that they're accomplishing something, they actually give more. That has been, if you look at any studies, that's what comes out. Throughout COVID, what has happened is that organizations, not only on the response, they have to become more efficient, whether they have to figure out more direct through online, using other resources. At the flip side, on the fundraising side, what's happening is now all galas. People talk about these fancy galas. I'd say probably only about 0.5% of galas is truly worthwhile in the financially. There's very few galas. Galas usually cost, basic gala might cost them $500,000 and they'll raise $200,000. Like, that's not really a great fundraising event. There are some who will cost them $5 million and raise $50 million, which again, those are maybe 0.5%. So the shift that I see happening right now is the efficiencies in the nonprofit, in their fundraising, and they're forcing them to figure out smarter ways through technology, which is a lot more cheaper, a lot more effective, is inspiring a lot of their donors to go further. And that's something that I see as a trend moving further, and a lot of their donors and philanthropists are excited about how much more they can accomplish.
Thank you, Yehuda, and we'll go into a bit more detail around there. Everybody feel free to drop in questions, thoughts. I'd love to take some of your questions for the panelists as we go along, and I'm checking them on the chat, so feel free to do that. So Leslie, tell us a bit about what the last 2.5 months have been like working at Google, working in the voice space.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you can imagine, we saw a big spike in users searching for information about COVID, but not just any information, authoritative information that they could trust. And so we saw big spikes there. We looked for ways, both with Google Search and Google Assistant, to support users in providing the information that they were looking for about the virus as things were emerging and happening so quickly. Another thing is, business hours, right? So I recently had to go give blood at my local LabCorp, and I organized my calendar so I could be there, 5 minutes before it closed. in line with my schedule, and I arrive and it's already closed because they've changed their business hours to be no longer open, you know, the way that they were previously before COVID. And so I was really bummed out, and I was a little bit mad at Google because they didn't have the right, you know, we didn't have the right business hours. But that's another thing that's really affecting users right now, is they want access to the right updated information, and that includes access to, you know, when is my favorite restaurant going to be open so I can go pick up takeout, because we know restaurants have really different hours right now. On the Google Assistant side, we have made a big pivot and shift towards really leaning into use cases that we know are going to matter to users right now. So with everyone at home in shelter in place, you can imagine the kinds of use cases that are much more relevant. So things like help me put a meal on the table using some of the recipes partners that I just mentioned earlier, or help me educate my kids. My kids are at home. How can Google Assistant give them a fun educational experience via voice? Or communicate. How can you make it easier for me to communicate with my loved ones during this time? Productivity, help me set timers, help me set reminders for myself, help me build shopping lists. And so enabling these experiences all via voice and doing it seamlessly, and having the technology just kind of work for you instead of you having to kind of go into an app or you know, type on a keyboard. You can just use your natural language and say what it is that you need. And Google Assistant can be there for you. So we've really made that pivot to lean into the kinds of experiences that users are really craving and needing more of while they're spending so much more time at home.
That's really interesting. And I think the home has taken on so many more of our identities today, right? So we're homeschooling, as you said, the need for educational content and distraction for our children. We are cooking and cleaning like many of us have never done before. We are working in many cases from home. So the multiple identities we wear at home need to be supported by our access to technology, right? And I really liked the few things that you pointed out there, Leslie, which I've taken notes on. So this ability to be responsive to the needs of your consumers. And really, it feels to me like you're paying attention to the different scenarios that people are facing and responding to their needs in a very quick and responsive way. Seamlessly, you said, you know, the ability to use technology in a seamless way, and reliability of content and information, content that we can trust. So leaning into those areas seems very important, and obviously within a Google setting and within home devices. But I wanted to apply that, Max, to some of the work that you're doing. So thinking about technology working for you in a very different context, so in emerging markets, how are you seeing manifestation of that during COVID-19 season?
That's a very good question, and I think, I mean, a lot of the use cases that usually come to mind when we think of like using technology at home and so on might seem on the comfort side sometimes. I would say in the markets where we're mostly active, so it's Africa and emerging Asia Pacific, it provides much more than just comfort. It really is a lifeline, and it's not only true on the health side, and I think the point that Leslie made around finding accurate, trustworthy information on health is extremely important. And it's not just the information. I think what we're seeing is that there's a lot of initiatives popping up, whether it's Sri Lanka, Benin, or Pakistan, around telemedicine, and not so much as a gimmick, but more as a way to do triage, to basically prevent the local healthcare systems from collapsing, because this is the main lessons that we've learned. I mean, from France, from the UK, from Italy, is that the main risk is an influx of patients that the healthcare systems can't cope with. So we're seeing this type of basically use of technology that will help solve structural problems. There is more than just healthcare, obviously. I mean, education is a really good example, but I think anyone with parents will have very quickly realized that you can't replace a school by just sitting your kids in front of Zoom or in front of YouTube or in front of TV. there's a lot that still needs to be done. And I think it's a wake-up call, not just in developing markets, but also in the markets where we currently sit, that there's a lot more that needs to be done for such tools to be developed, so that, I mean, in times of crisis, it is a replacement to schools, but in more normal times, it will be a complement to regular brick and mortar schooling, I would say. That's another area that I think is quite important. There's another one that I really want to call out for anyone who might not be familiar with the context in Africa in particular. Africa is way ahead of most other countries in terms of mobile payments. I mean, if you sit in the US or in London, you think like you've got this app and it's quite convenient and so on. I want to say this kind of behavior has existed in Kenya for nearly 12 years now. And it doesn't require the latest smartphone. It doesn't require an app. Basically, you do it all through, think of the phone you might have had 10, 15 years ago. This is compatible with that. And when I say it's been a massive change in the landscape, is that didn't exist 12 years ago, and this year it's reached 1 billion registered accounts, and there's about $2 billion transacting through mobile money system around the world, which is not a small number. But there's still a lot to be done. Obviously, 1 billion people with an account means that you still have a few billion people who do not have an account. And out of the 1 billion people who have an account, about only a third are actually transacting. And what a lot of parties realize now, and we're talking about local governments, but we're talking about international NGOs or parties like the World Bank and so on, realize that we've under leveraged all those assets, like obviously connectivity generally speaking, but mobile money services and so on, as a way to, for instance, to provide social protection. Whether you're talking about universal basic income for people who need relief on a regular basis, or whether you're looking at in times of crisis. At the moment, it is a health crisis. Tomorrow, it could be an earthquake. It could be food insecurity. There's a locust situation in Eastern Africa. And basically, I think I used the word wake-up call earlier, but I will use it again. I think there's great use done of existing infrastructure and technology today in that crisis environment. But what I expect is in the months to come, in particular, when we can stop looking at the direct impact on the health side, but more reflect about how we can be better, how we can better prepared, how we can support recovery, like leveraging these assets that exist to really go further.
Thank you. Yeah, that's. I'm happy you pointed that out. This idea of leveraging what exists and holding on to that as we transition into the next phase. You know, the what next,
yeah.
Where we hold on to certain elements of what have the shifts that seem to have worked for us. And very interesting to hear how sort of in the African context, they leapfrogged us in many ways, essentially technologically took this huge leap ahead of most of us. I'm going to go back to this theme that you've touched on, Max, and that Leslie really brought out for us, which I really liked, was how technology can work for you, right? And Yehuda, in your business, you talk a lot about social equity, right? Capitalizing and monetizing on the social equity that nonprofits have. And I wanted to hear a bit more about what that looks like, because that's a truly specific formula that Charidyon uses, and that I believe is really at the heart of your success. So tell us a bit about that.
So first of all, I want to just touch on what Max said in regards to schooling, which when it comes to, he says, you can't just rely on computers and YouTube and whatever is type of classrooms. There's been shifts, as again, everybody sees a lot more tech, Zoom, Google Hangouts, whatever that might be, apps right now. However, people are craving the human touch, we'll call it. And it's something that we're seeing, and it's something that we've been, a lot of what's been going on in the giving space for the most part has been either very old school or very tech oriented. So either people are galas, very, very heavy on people, human interaction, not scalable. Or people are on these online Facebook again, and they have this virtual community, again, not really deep, and therefore it's not growing much. What we've realized is that there has to be a hybrid of online and offline. And it's something that everybody's seeing right now, that yes, as much as people who are addicted to their phones right now, we all see like, okay, we need a break. We need a break. Like, I don't need another, so someone sent me a joke the other day. Again, I live in New York. He says, I'm going to have a Zoom meeting with more than 10 people is like asking me to drive to Brooklyn, like that's like already too much, so everybody's already like too many tech meetings, too many things. So really about social equity boils down to people don't realize what they're sitting on. And they don't realize what they have. Who are the people they have? Who are they sitting with? Who are the type of people who care about what they're doing? And the answer to most people's problems, their community, their tribe is really right under their nose, and they just don't even realize it. The people who should be getting involved, who would be interested, participating as a volunteer, as giving anything, is really about realizing that. A lot of times people try to go very, very far. And again, now with tech, everyone's like, okay, let me do Facebook ads or Google ads, whatever this might be. And really it's just about going one step inside inward and saying, okay, who is my inner circle? Who are the type of people we're looking to do? And realizing that that's what will create the great results. More of I've seen organizations who've spent multi-million-dollar marketing budgets, who have millions of followers or email lists, who will do a fundraiser and will raise, for conversation's sake, $500,000. And yet an organization who might have 1,000 people, a local school, will raise double the amount of money in a shorter amount of time. Because it's about going deeper, and really about going deeper within your community, your tribe. And that, again, to touch it to Max, it's like not forgetting that nothing replaces that human touch. And there is that hybrid, and realizing that magic of the online and offline, that's where you're gonna be able to be successful.
Yehuda, thanks for that. I really like what you're doing with the CDC Foundation in creating partnerships between corporates and the CDC Foundation to enable corporates to give through their employees. And I wanted you to talk a bit more to that. Because, we do a lot of sort of the C to B, the consumer directly giving to the nonprofit. In this case, you're creating a vehicle where the corporates can sign up and create their own campaign within the CDC Foundation and raise money through their employees, their own social equity network. Tell us about that.
So corporations are at a point in general where right now we're doing something of purpose and meaning is something valuable to them. And it used to be like where a lot of companies, they had their matching gift programs, and that was sort of, their CSR. And right now, what companies are realizing that if they just engage a little further and they are ready to leverage what they have, which is their employees and their clients, they can raise a tremendous amount of money. So many corporations, whether it's Morgan Stanley or Goldman Sachs or any other corporation, they realize that their employees are happy to go and get involved in a cause which talks to that organization. And every company, people think, okay, a company is sitting on what? They can give, their foundation has 20 million, 100 million, $1 billion, it doesn't make a difference. But if they can leverage what they are sitting on, which is their employees, their employees can bring in more money than their foundation can give. If their employees are excited about doing something, if they buy into their mission, their employees is their biggest. And a lot of times we have these foundations who are like, okay, I'm going to write out $1 million grant. I'll write 100,000, whatever the number is. We're like, no. It's better than giving out $1 million. Let's get your company behind this. Let's try to get everybody behind it. And you won't raise $1 million, you'll raise $10 million. And what people don't realize that what they have the ability to do, the power of what they have when they tap into, like Lily says, their social equity is worth a lot more than their checkbook.
Okay, thanks, Yehuda. We've got a few questions coming in. So one for Leslie. Leslie, have you noticed trends on Google Assistant usage by generational demographics? For example, if a boomer tends to use Google Assistant more to get trusted information versus someone who is in Gen Z? Really interesting question. Thank you, Amanda, for that. Leslie.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So The target audience for Google Assistant tends to be kind of like the 30 to 40 something who's super tech enabled. But that being said, we are seeing more usage by kind of older, as you said, the boomer generation. And I can see it in my parents even when they are kind of teaching them how to use the Google Assistant. And one of the features recently that I exposed them to was broadcast. So if my dad is in one room of the house and my mom is in another, then my dad can send a message to my mom without picking up a phone. He can just say to the Google Assistant, broadcast this message to to my mom, and then she'll hear it in the kitchen. And so it's interesting to kind of look at the use cases that are emerging and becoming more attractive to certain generations versus others. And then I would say there is a stat that I recently came across that 3/4 of parents would be willing to purchase a smart speaker for every room in their house for the purpose of entertaining their children. So, and especially right now with COVID, kids are at home. Parents are looking for ways to entertain their kids, and kids are finding ways, I think, particularly around games and trivia, how they best like to be entertained. So for sure, we're seeing varying use cases based on generation.
I see it myself. My daughter is constantly going up to the Google Assistant and saying, "Can you tell me a joke?" And I think there are about 7 reoccurring jokes, and we know them all now. So it's time for some new ones. She's like, "Google, you've already told me that one," and gets very frustrated. But yeah, it's true. We see that happening so across generations. So interesting to see all these various scenarios of how we are engaging with it. And Leslie, in terms of sort of the inclusivity part, so the role that women are playing in really creating this product, in distributing it and getting it to market, your role as a woman in technology, tell us, share a few words on that.
Yeah, so in fact, yesterday we just featured the 2nd episode of a program called Voice Talks that's been presented by Google Assistant, and it's our way to connect with the voice community, both partners and users, to really share kind of how Google is pivoting during these times. You can check it out at voicetalks.ai. And during that program, I had a chance to interview a senior engineering leader from Tile. Her name's Josie Haynes. And we had a really great conversation. She is very leaned into the women in tech and women in voice community. And we talked about how over half of women who have been in tech more than 10 years are leaving, are choosing to vote with their feet and leaving, and sort of kind of unpacking that issue and talking through ways that we can address that and get at it. We talked about how generally companies are doing a better job of recruiting diverse talent, women and underrepresented groups, but when it comes to retaining that talent and helping that talent thrive once they're in the organization, that's where organizations are falling short a little bit. So lots of work to do here. If it were easy, we would have solved it by now. But I'm excited to play a role here and see how we can shift the numbers.
Thank you. And Max, that brings me on to a point that came up for me when I was reading a recent article you've written, which I think you will publish soon on LinkedIn, where you really identify 5 digital solutions moving forward that we can all think about and consider, right? And I'm just going to list them out very quickly and then give you a chance to comment on them. So digital health solutions, digital education and skill training solutions, database decision-making, social protection powered by digital payments and financial inclusion. And the last one, which I'm really interested in, links to a little bit to what Leslie was saying, which in your opinion, digital solutions will only translate into real progress if they are inclusive. And I think this is a really important part, and I'd love you to share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a very important point in my opinion, because if we're only designing solutions, and again, I mean, these comments are true for any market. If you're only designing solutions that will target the lucky few, whether they're 5, 10, or 80% of the population who can afford, knows how to use, understands privacy, and you're basically translating inequalities from the physical world into the digital world, which is not the digital world that we want to build, basically. And usually the way I look at it is trying to solve billion people problems. And there are still 1 billion people who can't prove their identity. How do you make sure that you get over this hurdle in getting them access to the digital society? And is there a solution for that? I don't know. There's still, there are, an interesting one is on connectivity in particular. If you look at access to mobile internet, and bear in mind that if you're looking at markets like Africa or India and so on, most people use internet mostly through their mobile device. There's 750 million people who are still not covered by a mobile internet network, which is a really big number, and it's a hard issue to solve, because obviously the business models to cover these people are not always great. And a lot of people, and that includes mobile operators, and that includes Google and Facebook, are looking at solutions to solve this. But there's another problem, which is you have nearly 3.5 billion people today who are covered by a mobile internet network, but don't use it. They either can't afford it, or they don't know how to use it, or there's a security or safety issue which affects women usually much more than men, or there's no relevant content from there. So basically all these are just being outlined by the current crisis, and I always go back to anyone saying like, look, the crisis has brought the attention on this and that issue, and I say like, yeah, but it hasn't made the other ones disappear. So if we only use this as like digital can bring the solution, can it? Yes, definitely. But we need to start with the people, not start with the technology. And if you start with the people, you're much less likely to have that blind spot that mean that, I don't know, women, people in rural area, people who are not covered by a network, people who can't prove their identity, people with disabilities, we're basically going to be left out of the digital economy and the digital society the way they are too often left out of the physical one.
Thank you for that. And I think another problem at the core of some of these digital solutions that have started to occur through COVID-19 is really well pointed out here in this question from Shuhash, which I'm going to ask and see which of the panelists would like to respond to. So COVID-19 has been the change agent for digital technology adoption, but at the cost of privacy. What are your views?
Maybe I can cover very quickly, because this is something we work a lot on. And before we started, I was telling you I spent 2 hours this afternoon reading our privacy guidelines in French, English, and Spanish. It is extremely important, and I mean, in terms of crisis, it is sometimes okay to put some regulation, to put some, I was about to say principles. I don't think your principles should never be put on the side, but some regulation to relax, to try things. But I think it's extremely important to keep consumer privacy at the center of everything that we do. Because if we lose the trust of consumers, basically the potential will never get realized. And I would say that there are 3 areas where consumer privacy is in 3 locations. One is obviously with the companies that deal with the data, and it is the responsibility of Google, the same way it is the responsibility of a mobile operator to make sure that they treat this data in the right way. The second place where it sits is government. There needs to be regulation. There needs to be clear regulation, and that regulation needs to be enforced with the parties that I mentioned first. And then a point that's sometimes very much overlooked is it also sits with the consumer. If customers, if citizens are happy to give away their data, their privacy information, and so on, without looking clearly to what is done with this data, they are being part of the problem, unfortunately. So I think everybody needs to work together, the private sector, the public sector, and the citizens to make sure that like privacy stays at the top of the agenda.
Thank you. Leslie, have you got any thoughts on privacy?
Yeah, and a lot of what Max said resonates with me. So I'll just use an example in the finance space, because you can imagine when we're working with finance partners, that's one of their top concerns. And of course, we share that concern. So I mentioned American Express, I think, in my opening, and a couple of the ways that we're proactively addressing privacy is with the voice matching technology, where we know if it's you, Lily, or if it's you, Max, asking for your Amex account balance. And if we detect that it's not you, then we're not going to give you that information. The other step that we've enabled is setting a PIN, so consumers can set a PIN when they link their Amex account to their Google account, which basically then when they say, hey, Google, what's my Amex account balance? The user is going to have to go and type in a PIN before they can get that information. And that's up to the consumer as to whether they want to set that PIN or not. So we're thinking about different ways to incorporate privacy steps to ensure consumers feel like we are proactively acknowledging those concerns. The other point, and I think Max made this point as well, is that you as a consumer have the ability to wipe out all interactions that you've ever had with the Google Assistant. And so that it just doesn't exist anymore. You own that data. You own your interactions with the Google Assistant technology. So for sure, this is a key concern of ours. It's more and more in what Sundar, our CEO, talks about when he talks externally. Thanks for the question.
Okay, I'm going to move on to our last question, which is a great one that's come through from Kenneth, who actually says, Leslie, we are Penn State. So there's a connection there for you, Leslie. And this is really a question that I also was going to put to all of you as we come to the close of this session, and perhaps something for all of us to leave and reflect on post webinar today. So it's, what do you each think is the next big shift in businesses post-COVID? So what have we learned from the shifts that we've seen happen, and what are we going to take with us into the next phase? And I'll start with you, Yehuda.
I think the next big shift will be a lot more, well, I think as an individuals, I think a lot more people are going to want a lot more independency when it comes to business. I think there'll be a great shift towards entrepreneurship even more because of the job market, and realizing that you're at the mercy of a major corporation. And as well as overall, I think the efficiencies of the way people will be thinking about things, lowering costs at every way, and trying to minimize that. Because if you look around at any businesses which were hurt, overall, it's the businesses that had a lot of dead weight on it, or did not have the ability to shift very quickly. So I think going forward, businesses will be looking at that. And again, tech will be for that at the forefront.
Thank you, Yehuda. Max?
I will call out two, in my opinion, two trends. One is internal, one's external. The internal one is that I think a lot of businesses, the large ones, but also the small ones, will have to probably refocus on their core strength. I think it's the truth of any crisis. They're going to have to cut some of the fat, unfortunately. And it will be painful, and sometimes it will be voluntary for maybe organizations that are not affected directly. In some cases, it might be imposed by the circumstances, but I think we might see, in terms of business shift, like a refocus on what each company is really good at, what's their true value proposition and unique value proposition, and refocus on that. And in terms of external shift, I think the market is also going to push for that, but I think consumers, whether they're individuals or companies, are going to ask for a lot more resilience. And I think we should expect our customers, our users, to ask us, like, what happens if? And with that if really fresh in mind, like, what happens if there's a tsunami? What happens if I'm stuck at home? What happens if I lose my job? Like, resilience and preparedness will have to be built into a lot of solutions and sales pitches.
I like that idea of consumers asking us what if, right? The resilient oriented consumer. Now the expectation of the consumer is that we have thought through so many more of the risks than in previous situations. Leslie, over to you, and then a few final thoughts from me, and we're then gonna let you all go.
Yeah, thanks for this question. So I'll take it from the angle of the opportunity for businesses that are operating in the voice space. I think if you nowadays, for me, I live in an apartment building. I walk out of my building. I now see all of the doors that I touch when I leave my building, or the handles that I have to touch to access my home, the elevator buttons. We now see so much more, but we have to physically touch and then have a reaction to that. And I think it will accelerate businesses building for voice. We heard a lot about mobile first many years ago when it was emerging, and now with voice, I think you're hearing more businesses talk about building for voice first, or accelerating their voice experience for their customers for that reason. So I think we're just going to see more and more in how voice can impact how we engage, how we get contactless deliveries, and I think we're really excited at Google to be a big part of that.
Right, so the Internet of Things, being able to speak to things rather than have to touch them. Interesting perspectives on the future from all three of you. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you want to drop in your LinkedIn profile or any social media handles or your email, we have started to do so. Please stay in touch with us. My final thoughts are that following the Spanish influenza, there were some significant shifts at all levels. At a policy level, the biggest one in many European countries was the introduction of healthcare system, a welfare system that enabled people to access healthcare. And I thought that was huge and extremely transformational. And I'm looking forward to seeing what happens in phase 1, 2, and 3 of reintegration post-COVID, at a policy level, at a business level, and as you rightly said, Max, also at a sort of citizen level. What are the choices that we will make? What are the things that we will keep doing, stop doing, and how quickly will we forget? That is a question that I have, and I hope we don't forget all too quickly. Wishing you all a wonderful rest of your day wherever you are in the world, and stay in touch. Thank you again.